All right, we are live on our help session here, October 30th. And we have actually moved these. We had requests to move these off of the YouTube channel, the main YouTube channel. And so we've moved to a new page here. If you're having any trouble finding this, you're going to want to look at plus.google.com/learn light and sound sessions. That's where we're now located. And also found a little hiccup here with the help session today for whatever reason that I don't understand, but I'll work on and get resolved. We have the Q&A panel is usually enabled, but for whatever reason it's disabled. This is a new Google Plus page, so I have to work through that issue. In the meantime, if you want to leave questions or comments, I guess let's do that over at the let's see here. I guess it'll be the CurtisJuddAudio. Let's see if it's streaming there. It's not streaming there. So I'll have to work on that. I apologize for the snafu there. I didn't realize that that was disabled by default. So in any case, I'll just talk through some things today and we'll get that fixed and working again for next week. All right. Today, a few things that I wanted to talk through. First of all is talk about a new microphone that I was actually sent to me. So there's the full disclosure on that by a company called Aperture. I usually don't get very excited about microphones that come from companies that do general film gear. They don't usually pan out very well, or at least they're nothing to write home about, so to speak. This one actually surprised me, and we'll have a piece up on the channel here before too long, but talk about that. And then also another thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is when you're doing post-production work to manage peaks and transients in your audio, there are a few different ways you can do that. You can use a compressor. You can manually manage individual clip gain, or you can also use leveler plugins, and then you can also use limiters. So I want to talk a little bit about where you might use each of those and how they differ a little bit. So I suppose let's talk about this microphone a little bit here first. So this is called the Aperture ALAV. They sent it to me. It has not been released officially yet. So it's not for sale yet, but it will be here within the next few weeks. It's definitely in the more affordable end of the market. I believe it's going to be priced around $35 to $40 US. So it's fairly inexpensive. Comes in this actually kind of interesting case. It's semi-soft, semi-hard, however you want to look at that. But it's a nice protective case. And then once you open it, I'll show you here. The mic, first of all, one thoughtful feature is that it comes on this little kind of rubber thing that you can wind it up on, so you can manage the cable pretty nicely. So that's a nice feature there as a start. Not usually an unboxer, but let me just show you what this one has got here. Here is the battery pack, and it has an inbuilt lithium-ion battery. They say that it lasts 200 hours. If so, that's a really long time. What we have here is the microphone input is here. This is the output. So you output the microphone here either to your camera or to your audio recorder. And then you can also monitor here. Incidentally, this cable or this input here where you monitor is also where you charge the battery. And there's a cable for each of those. So kind of an interesting thing. It also doesn't have an on-off switch. When you plug the mic in, it turns on. So again, thoughtful design. This is really, I would consider this in my tests, and I'll have a review coming up here soon. The nice thing about this is it seems to solve most of the issues that I had with the Audio-Technica ATR 3350 and the 3350i. That was a very inexpensive mic. It was a $20-ish, $20 to $25 mic. And the nice thing about it is it was $20. Then there were a lot of bad things about it, but it was a great mic to start with. And it got the mic close, which is one of the biggest challenges in getting great audio. But this solves a lot of those problems, and yeah, again, is still south of $40 US. So that's that. It made me laugh a little bit. It does come with, in the instructions, they call it duct tape, and you would never really want to use duct tape to attach your microphone to clothes or anything of that nature. It comes with a little roll here, and I think it actually is duct tape. Um, anyway, nice try. Not the best to use. It just leaves too much adhesive on clothes and things like that, so I wouldn't use that. It does come with a little wind cover, furry wind cover. They chose white. At first I saw the white and I thought, but I guess if you're interviewing an executive who's wearing a white button-down shirt, that would work. I don't know if it's the best choice, and it's actually rather large, but it is very good at eliminating wind noise. So there's that. And then 3 cables here. Let me see if I can pull these out. First one, this is for charging. So again, this plugs into the monitoring port. And then on the other side, there is a micro USB. So you have to have your own micro USB cable. I think most people do with smartphones these days, but if not, you need to supply your own with that. And then you have 2 cables that you can use to connect the battery pack to your recorder or camera. Again, so you plug this in, you plug one of these in. So you can either go into it comes TRRS out of the battery pack to TRS. So if you're going into, say, a Tascam DR05 or Zoom H1 or anything else with a 3.5 millimeter input, or you can go into your smartphone, mobile phone, with a TRRS to TRRS cable. So really pretty thoughtful design. That's all well and good, but the question is, how does it sound? And that's where I was really surprised. This microphone sounded surprisingly good, again, for a $35 mic. I felt like when I loudness normalized the signal to, what was it? It was minus 24 LUFS, which is the standard. Well, in the in the United States, it's a standard for television loudness. So when I loudness normalized to minus 24, the noise floor sat at minus 67 dB. I usually aim to get it down to minus 60. So that was actually really, really impressive. Most inexpensive lavalier mics that I've used that are $50 and under, the noise floor is usually sitting somewhere up closer to the 50 something range, 55. Like the the Asden Pro XD wireless system, the lavalier mic that comes with that, when I loudness normalized to minus 24, the noise was sitting at about minus 55. So this is significantly quieter, 12 dB quieter. So I was really, really impressed with that for the price. And we'll have a review of that one coming up here pretty soon. So every once in a while you find a little gem, and it feels like that one was a little gem. So that's a good one. Let's see here. Again, I apologize. The Q&A feature appears to be disabled this time. It may be something I did in the setup. So I will work on that for next week. And we'll get that working again. Let me show you some things here that I've been looking at as far as Audition is concerned, or post-processing, not Audition specific, but post-processing in general. Let me just open a little audio file here and share my screen. Okay. Okay, so we should be seeing Audition at this point. Yes. Okay. So a couple of things. When you're doing the post-processing on your dialogue audio, we're gonna again speaking mainly of dialogue audio here. The first thing you have to do to get things loud enough is that you usually have to manage some of these peaks in one way or another. So let me show you what I mean. So if I come over here to amplitude statistics and I just scan through the audio here, my audio right now is at minus 24 LUFS. And if I were going to broadcast to TV or something like that, I think we're okay. That's the target area we want to be. However, if we are going to post this online, um, for example, on YouTube, we would want this to be louder. And the current recommendations, again, these are not standards, but these are recommendations at this point, is that when you're producing to YouTube or somewhere where the content will be consumed on, being very frank, low quality playback devices, it'll be played back on mobile phones while someone's commuting to work or something like that. The recommendation is you want to probably loudness normalize to minus 19 LUFS if it's mono, or minus 16 LUFS if it's stereo. So those are perceptually the same, incidentally. So we probably want to make this a little bit louder. And the way to do that, if we just take this audio file here, let's go down to the match volume panel. If you don't have this, again, you just come up to Window and choose Match Volume. Make sure that's checked, and that'll usually show up here. If we take this audio clip, drop it here, and then we say, okay, make that to minus 19 LUFS. Watch what happens here. You can see that it's taking these peaks and it's actually chopping them off. And we don't really want to go that hot anyway, because we really need our true peak to be at minus 1.5. So if we scan this again, you can see now our true peak is minus 0.06, and that needs to be at minus 1.5. So we've got a problem there. So I'm just going to undo that. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to want to manage these peaks, and there are several ways you can do that. And let me explain each of them and when you might want to use each of them. So this piece of audio is actually not that bad. It's just dynamic dialogue audio, and that's perfectly normal. And this one, I would probably just use a compressor and call it a day. So pretty straightforward. If, on the other hand, you have a particular piece or passage in the audio where, for whatever reason, the speaker gets really, really loud for just a second or so, and that piece, for one word at the start of a sentence or whatever it may be, and you really need to pull that one back quite a bit more, and you want it to be less loud than everything else, that's when you actually might use where you might modify the clip gain. And the way you would do that would be you just highlight the one piece of audio that you want to decrease, and you can actually zoom way in and make sure you're getting just the piece you want. But in Audition, what you would do is you just grab this this little piece up here and you reduce the overall gain. And you can see as I pull that down, the waveform is pulling it down. It's pulling the gain down equally. And what's interesting here, let me undo that. Just let's zoom in really close here so you can see what's actually happening. You can see if we zoom in close enough, we can actually see individual samples. And again, this was recorded at 48,000 hertz or 48 kilohertz, which means that there's a sample 48,000 times every second. That's what these dots represent, are individual samples. So there are 48,000 of these in each second of recorded audio. When you pull the clip gain down, watch what happens to each of the samples. It's actually reducing each of those samples by the same amount. Now, you may be thinking, well, not exactly. These that are closer to the middle line aren't getting reduced as much. Actually, that's not true. This is actually a lot. I think it's logarithmic. So the closer you get to minus infinity, the smaller the space between each of these lines here. So in any case, what that's doing is when I adjust the clip gain, all of the samples are getting reduced. Now that's quite a bit different than compression. If you consider compression, let's just apply a compressor here really quickly. Use our single band compressor built into Audition. When I do a compressor, what I'm really trying to do is just adjust the peaks here. So here, if I set this to minus 12, threshold to minus 12, what I'm doing is I'm only affecting things that are above the minus 12 threshold. So that's going to be anything that's above this little window here. So I drag it along the minus 12 line. So it's only going to affect the waveforms above there. So let's go ahead and apply that and see what happens. Okay, you can see the difference here. It didn't affect the main body of all the waveforms, really just everything that was above minus 12. It kind of moved those down. So let me just show you before and after again. Before and after. Before and after. Now, technically, it did affect these a little bit, but it's mainly just affecting the peaks. So that's an important difference. And the difference is that when you use compression, you're not trying to make any individual part quieter overall, because then what we're going to do is we're going to loudness normalize this. But um, using clip gain, you can actually reduce the perceptual loudness of that part that's sticking out. So again, if it's a really loud word at the start of a sentence, when you actually highlight that and reduce the gain, where you're reducing all of the samples, that one will sound perceptually less loud in the final audio. Whereas if you just do compression, what you're doing is just managing these peaks. You're pulling the peaks back, but leaving the main body of the audio the same. And then when we come up here and we loudness normalize, we just use our match volume feature here. We'll go to minus 19 LUFS. Now you'll notice this time when we run this, the peaks didn't get chopped off because again, we compressed those beforehand. So that's a kind of the distinction there between compression and using clip gain. I typically, for if I have an individual word or something in the clip that is sticking way out, it's way too much louder than everything else, and I want to pull that back in, I'll use the clip gain. So I'll go ahead and highlight that individual word and pull it back. Then I'll do compression to manage the transient peaks, and then I'll loudness normalize like we just did here. So that's usually my process. Now, another thing you can use is of course, a limiter. And let me just undo this again, get us back to the start. Okay, here's our original audio again. So a limiter, if I just come up here to effects, amplitude and compression, hard limiter, if I wanted to say, hey, these peaks right here, so anything above -8, it's just a little too hot, I'm going to use a limiter here. So I'll set the maximum amplitude to -8. Usually that's called threshold in a limiter. Adobe Audition is instead use the term maximum amplitude. We'll put our input boost to 0. Look ahead time 7 milliseconds is fine, and release time 1,000 milliseconds is fine as well. So when I apply that, watch what happens to the waveform here. Boom. Pretty much just chops it right off at -8. And that's a hard limiter. Technically, when you're thinking about a limiter, what a limiter does is a limiter is pretty much the same thing as a compressor, except with a really extreme compression ratio. Like it kicks in immediately and it squashes everything down. Usually it's a compressor with the ratio set to -20 to 1, or sorry, not -20 to 1, but a 20 to 1 compression ratio, or a -infinity to 1 compression ratio. That means anything that goes above the threshold gets automatically pulled right back down pretty much to the threshold. So the problem with this is that it doesn't sound very good. And it's usually not something I use to manage peaks like that. It's something I'll use to manage peaks at the very end. And I'll only use it on transients that are still sticking out quite a bit. Let me show you what I mean here in practical terms. So let's take this. We're going to loudness normalize this to maybe -21. Let's just see what happens here. My peaks are getting pretty close here. If for some reason I were going to do that, I would want to make sure, again, we'd be sitting in a situation like this, where this peak here, for example, I can highlight that. It's hard to see. Let's get in a little closer here. You can see some of these transients here are actually peaking above -1.5 dB. Now, if I wanted to keep it at -1.5 dB true peak, which is typically what I want to do, because when I do the final export on my audio, I need it to be at -1.5 true peak, or else things could start clipping. Here's where I might use a limiter just to manage the very tip top of these peaks here. And you can see if I come and do that, let's go to the hard limiter, and we'll set that to -1.5. Keep those other settings the same and apply that. Watch these peaks. So now you can see those are at -1.5. And if I run amplitude statistics now, you can see our true peak is now at minus 1.46. I'm not going to get into a long discussion about why that is, but I might actually come in here again because, again, I want to be at minus 1.5. And I know that's somewhat arbitrary, but I've never found audio to clip when I put the true peak at minus 1.5 and then export it where it gets compressed again, or digitally compressed. If I get to minus 1.5, the audio won't clip. And usually that's a comfortable threshold that I work with. So we're going to make it minus 1.6. Now, the reason I'm changing it to minus 1.6 here is that this is a peak limiter, not a true peak limiter. So there's an important distinction between that. I actually have to reduce the peak to minus 1.6 here. Let's go ahead and apply that. And then scan the selection again. To get the true peak to minus 1.56, I had to actually peak limit to minus 1.6. So that's a long discussion that we probably won't have right now, but the main idea is that sometimes you have to go a little harder. So that's when I would use a limiter. I wouldn't use a limiter on a regular basis to manage transients as a first pass. I just use it as a last pass, just to make sure that things are looking okay, and only if I need to barely affect the hottest peaks. And again, only if they're for a short period of time, because otherwise you're going to start affecting the quality of the audio, and it's going to sound very kind of crushed. So I just wanted to kind of run by you that distinction between those three different ways of managing transients and your peaks. Again, that's going to be clip gain, compression, or peak limiting. So again, I'll typically use the clip gain, and again, is manually selecting an individual word or passage and pulling the gain down on that, because that'll affect the entire thing and make it sound perceptually quieter than it was. I'll then use compression just to manage the peaks. And that won't make any individual part sound quieter. It'll just manage those peaks so that I can actually then increase the overall gain to normalize it to whatever target I want. And then I'll finally use limiting to make sure that none of my remaining peaks are going above minus 1.5 dB true peak. So those are the three main things. I'll probably attempt to put that into a one of our upcoming episodes on the YouTube channel. So we can have that as a reference. But that's just some important things to keep in mind and when you might use each of those. Let me just undo this here. Let me just run through a couple of more things related to this. If I were actually processing this audio, I would just use a compressor here. So let me just show you. I would probably come in here, because if I measure this right now, we are at, oops. Here's how the audio was originally. So scan minus 24 LUFS. So I would, because again, this is a mono signal, I want to get that to minus 19. So I need another 5 dB of headroom between my peaks. I don't have that right now. I'm at minus 4 here, minus 4 here. So I'm going to need to do some compression. So I just come down here, apply a compressor. Let's probably compress everything above. Probably don't even need to go to minus 12. Let's just do minus 10 and see how that goes for us. So minus 10 I'll set as my threshold. Just leave my ratio at 2:1. This audio, again, doesn't need a lot of compression. It's not sticking out that much. So click apply. Now we would come up to the file, drag it down into the match volume, set this to minus 19, again, which is our distribution target on that. And we're in pretty good shape. Some of the transients on this right here and right here are actually above minus 1.5. And I think what I would do here's actually a case where I might use clip gain just a touch. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to highlight this one right here. So this one is still peaking at less than minus 1.1, sorry, less than minus 1. So I'm actually going to come in here and I'll actually just pull this one down a little bit. You know, I have an option. I could limit, but I want to get it below 1 first. So that's going to quiet that one down just a touch. Probably won't be perceptible only because it's less than 3 dB. That's another kind of rule of thumb that I often use. It's not perfect, but it's just, again, a rule of thumb is that if you reduce something by minus 3 dB or you increase the gain on something by 3 dB, it usually requires a 3 dB step before you can actually hear a difference for most people. And I find that to be true most of the time. So that's usually a rule of thumb that I use. And this one here, you can see the peaks were at less than -1. I just want to get those to about -1 or just barely under -1, like that. So I don't want to affect the loudness of those necessarily too much, but I don't want to chop off the peaks either. So from there, we might just run the amplitude statistics again. We're at -19 LUFS, so we're doing well there. And our true peak amplitude is at -1.10. This is where I might just go in then, bring in the hard limiter, set it to -1.5 as a first pass. See what that gets us on in terms of true peak. So you can see it didn't chop it off a lot, just a little bit. That probably won't be, we won't be able to hear that. It won't be too disturbing. So let's scan again. We're now at -1.46 dB true peak. Going to need to limit again just a little bit more. So we'll go to -1.6 and then scan again. And we're now at -1.56 dB true peak. So I think we're good there. Our overall loudness is still at -19. And so I would consider that done and ready to go. So that's how I would do it on a practical level. Now, there are other tools you can use to level out dialogue other than those three, but those are kind of the three standards that you'll have in almost any audio editing application or digital audio workstation, as they're called. If, on the other hand, let's undo all that again. Here's our original audio. There is another one, and I will confess I am not an expert at using this one, but there is also sometimes, in Audition for certain and other apps as well, a speech volume leveler. Now, if you can get this one working, you can actually do some pretty awesome things because what the problem with all those that I've showed you so far is that if you're overall increasing the gain by quite a lot, and in our case, it wasn't too much. We were going from -24 LUFS to -19, so it was 5 dB. But the problem is that when you do that, you increase your noise floor by 5 dB as well. So, for example, if you let's increase this noise, or this is actually not a noise floor, but this is a air quotes silent passage. If I increase that by 5 dB, I can't really visually see it, but let me just do this. So I'm going to scan this selection. Our RMS amplitude is -70 right now, but if I increase this by 5, measure that again, it's now -65. So I've increased the noise floor by 5 dB. In this particular case, that's not going to be an issue, but I used a pretty nice microphone here, and it was a pretty quiet room. So the problem is if you have to increase the gain too much, you're going to bring all that noise up as well. And if you can dial in a speech volume leveler, you can actually avoid some of that. So what that's going to be doing for you is it's going to make it so that if you get it working just right, then you don't have to chop off all of the peaks and then raise the gain for everything. It can actually raise the gain for the quieter passages. So, for example, if we're looking at this audio here, you can see this particular word was a little bit quieter. These words right here were definitely quieter. Yeah, relative, again, their amplitude is not anything close to these other peaks. If we could just bring these up without bringing up anything else, we wouldn't have to do as much. We wouldn't have to increase the overall gain of the entire clip as much to get to our target, which again, in this case, is going to be -19 LUFS. So that's something I'm kind of working on right now. The problem is if you apply it wrong, and let's just do a quick pass here. If I just use one of these defaults here, let's just use medium. And again, if I measure this silent passage here ahead of time, looking at the average RMS amplitude is -70. If I go ahead and apply this, right now it's in our effects rack. If I apply that and then look what happened to this section right here. First of all, we forgot to undo it all the way. Let me undo it. Undo that. Okay, here we are back at the start. All right, so if I measure this section right here first, -70. Then if I apply the speech volume leveler, let me just come in here, get that, use this medium setting, apply it. Look what happens to this silent section. -44. Wow, that's an example of using the speech volume leveler badly. However, there are ways to use it so that you can, again, increase these quietest words here without affecting anything else. And that's the art. I've been experimenting with it. I was playing with it last night some, and there were a couple times I was able to just really dial it in, but I need to get my process worked out here before I go teaching anyone else how to use it because I don't feel like I've really got it nailed myself. There are also some other features. I actually would typically turn these off. Um, I'm not exactly sure how this noise gate's working, and gates can be tricky um, with dialogue audio because gates only kick in when the person's not talking, and so it starts to sound very, very obvious if you have it if you apply it wrong. So to be honest, Adobe Audition's vo- um, voice leveler is not the most sophisticated. One that's really nice that I'd like to show you. Just so you're aware, again, I realize most people can't afford to purchase this, but if I am, oh, let's see here. In Isotopes, RX Advanced, and actually their RX Basic, I don't remember if the Basic has this or not, but let me just show this to you. I have to reshare. Okay, so this is RX 5. This is a brand new version, just came out a few weeks ago. But they also have this leveler plugin. This actually does more. It actually has an S reduction, and it also has breath control. So those are two of the things that could potentially get really, really emphasized in dialogue audio when you're doing leveling or compression for that matter. So this has some things that really make this a nice to work with. So for example, if I want to do a consistent voiceover here, let's just compare that. Now watch the waveform here. If I look at the settings that I applied, yeah, see, this is where it gets to be an art. Here's the original audio. It's actually bringing it down some, but let me tweak the settings just a little bit here. Let's get our target level at -24 and try that. Okay. So that's pretty subtle, but let me show you the difference here. So watch these quiet passages here when I turn on the settings, depending on this on the particular section. But look at these right here. It's actually bringing those up some. Technically, it's actually bringing up all the peaks as well, but it's a little bit more subtle. So again, if you can dial in those settings just right, let's try maybe -22. That just looks like it's bringing everything up. So there's a lot to learn here, and this is where I don't feel like I have a good handle on this yet, but there are lots of audio post guys that are raving about this new leveler in RX5. And again, I'm not showing this to you saying that, hey, you need to get this. I'm showing this to you just so you understand what's available and what some of the professionals in the industry are using. But sometimes they'll use a leveler instead of compression, and then kind of the traditional approach that certainly I've been using and many of us have been using, because you can keep the noise floor better under control that way. So just some things to think about there. All right. There is a group chat thing here. I apologize again that Q&A thing, for whatever reason, got disabled. I think it was maybe something I forgot to check when I opened up before I started the Hangout on air session. I'm told also, or based on the reading I did here, just right as the session was starting, you can't turn that on once you've started the session, unfortunately. But there is this chat session or this chat window here. I'm wondering if any of you guys can see that. And if you can, if you want to enter questions there, that would be just great. I'll leave that open just so we can look at that. All right. Some of the questions, one of the things that I'm trying to figure out here is that among the audience here, is Audition what most of you are using, or are you using Audacity or using something else? I'm curious about that because I think we got a pretty interesting response. I did a little episode on the YouTube channel with Audacity a couple of weeks ago, and I'm trying to assess the response there. Like how interested are people in working with Audacity as opposed to Audition? The trick is that I wish they weren't so close in name. Audacity doesn't have some of these tools here. It doesn't have, and that's why, I mean, I think it's an awesome application. So I don't want to misrepresent it to anybody here. However, it is missing some things that are pretty important. It does not have a true peak meter. It does not have a loudness meter. It does not have a loudness normalization feature. And again, for whatever reason, Adobe Audition has been calling it match volume. I think it's in the new version that's supposed to come out in the next few weeks here. I think they've actually changed the name to match loudness or something like that. I did see something on their blog saying they were going to change the name. But it's features like that that are missing in Audacity that make it so that it's not as practical to work with if you want to get consistent results from video to video. You can kind of simulate some of those things using just very, very basic tools. But I understand that when you're getting started, you may not necessarily have the budget to get a Creative Cloud subscription, which is, somewhat expensive. For the normal person, it's $50 US for a Creative Cloud subscription. And if you're just going to get Audacity, I think it's $20 a month. So it almost, which is a little frustrating. It'd be nice if they kind of lowered the single app subscription rate. But in any case, that's the reality. So I realize that's not necessarily achievable for everybody. So kind of walking a fine line there. I think probably what we'll do is we'll do some Audacity work, and mainly focus on Audition just because it has some of those tools that we typically need to do the final finishing. All right. Not sure what this showcase is here. I think okay, I think this showcase. Yeah, I'm not sure what that does in any case. We'll just come back to the group chat. Okay. What else to talk about here? We are still working on hiding lavaliers. I am having mixed results. And so that's, again, for those of you that are have actually signed up for the sound course, it's not like I'm trying to avoid it. I'm still trying to get it dialed in. But hiding lavaliers is an art that takes a lot of effort to get good at. And so I haven't forgotten. I'm still working on that. But I guess I could summarize what I've done so far and what's working, what's not. Just a second here. Grab this. We have talked about a few things in the past. Rycoat, again, makes these undercovers. I'm not having amazing success with these, actually. What they include is you have these sort of felt dots that you place over this. They come in two parts. Let's see here. I can do this without totally. So these are sort of a double-sided adhesive. You pull these off, adhere them to the underside of the clothing of the talent. Then you just put the lavalier mic on the adhesive on the other side, and then you cover it with those felt dots. And the felt is supposed to make it so when the clothing rubs across it, it doesn't generate too much noise. I'm not finding those are working great for me. They're okay. But I think where you place them is really, really important. And I think the same applies for moleskin. This actually, I think I may have actually bought the wrong thing here. This is mole foam, which is a little bit thicker, and I think it'd probably be better to have something that's not so thick. So I'd actually get moleskin next time, and actually I need to go buy some of that to test that out as well. But I haven't had amazing success with this either. The felt, in theory, what's supposed to happen is the felt is a soft material, and then when the clothes rub across this, as this is covering your microphone, hidden underneath the shirt, say, for example, when the clothes rub across this, it's supposed to reduce the amount of noise you get, but not necessarily finding that to be the case. And it may be something I'm doing wrong. So I'm still working on that. So please don't give up on me. that segment in the training course is coming. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. What I'm actually finding works the best in most cases is like when I'm outside and person's wearing like a jacket, for example, I just clip the mic underneath the jacket and say, okay, don't wave your arms too much. And we can usually get a pretty good signal that way. It just seems like if I don't introduce that additional fabric or foam or felt type material, that I get less rubbing. So for whatever reason, that's what I'm finding generally. Now, on the other hand, I've tried it and failed at that as well. So when I did a corporate piece, I think it was about a month ago now, I did run into issues where we put it underneath the sport coat of an actor, and I could not get that thing to be quiet. I was picking up almost nothing, it seemed like, but clothing noise. And he was moving around a fair bit, so that just wasn't going to work. And we ended up, just as a last ditch effort, we ended up just literally attaching the lavalier mic to his lapel, and it was in the picture. Fortunately, it was we were able to put it so it didn't show up that much. It was a dark sport coat. So we put it on the outside there, and it blended in with the coat pretty well. It was still somewhat visible, but not too bad. And we hid the cable nicely. So anyway, still working on that. Again, this is another example of why I don't love lavalier microphones. Sometimes you've got to have them if that's your only option, but they are not my go-to option. I would much rather boom a mic anyway. And in most cases, I'll do both. I'll boom, if I'm indoors, again, a hypercardioid small diaphragm condenser mic. And if I'm outdoors, a shotgun mic. And then I'll use the lavaliers just as backup if for whatever reason I didn't get the boom queued up just right, or they move too much. And again, if you're doing talking head or interview, it's really easy to boom. Keep that in mind. I think a lot of people just default to lavalier mics. And lavalier mics actually, I guess the irony is that when someone is just sitting in one place or just standing in one place and talking, lavalier mics aren't generally as troublesome as if the person is actually walking around and moving more. Although it still can be a problem depending on how animated the talent is. But almost always I will use a boom mic as the primary mic. And almost always those results, sound better because it's a boom mic as opposed to a lavalier. And I guess it's subjective, but from my experience is that almost always a boom mic will sound better than a lavalier. The problem with lavalier mics is that they're mounted usually right on the body of the person, obviously. So that's good because when they move to another location, the mic's right there with them. It's bad because it sounds like the mic is mounted on their body, and that's not a very natural sound. So I don't mean to go on and on about that topic. I'll leave it alone, but that's one thing to definitely consider. All right, we have looks like 15 minutes left here. I wish I had the Q&A session thing turned on so I could take some questions. My mistake again. We'll get that resolved for next week. What else should we talk about here? I am working also on the final review of the Zoom F8 audio recorder. So for those that are looking at a more, I don't know if I'd call it professional. I think it's really kind of designed for enthusiasts and indie filmmakers. I think the professionals are still probably going to choose Sound Devices or Zaxcom mixer recorders, but the Zoom F8 again is pretty impressive. The last things that I had to test on that were, first of all, the iOS app, so the little mobile app that you can use to actually mix. So you get linear faders and you could actually do a stereo mix while you're recording, which is kind of cool. Um, and then there's also time code. The problem with time code is I don't have a camera that really does time code, so I'm probably not going to be able to test that in the final review, and we'll just need to refer to others who have tested that. It appears that the Zoom F8's time code module, the time code generator, is actually very good. So I'm not going to worry too much about that in my review because, again, others have tested it. I don't have the facilities to test it, so we'll let others handle that. But the app is actually looking quite good. I was concerned, and there are a couple questions that have come up about the app. So I would have my iPad. Oh, let's see here. I don't have it with me right now, but the recorder would sit in my sound bag, and then I would connect via Bluetooth from my iPad, or you could do it from your phone as well. It's a little easier with the iPad. With the phone, the faders are a little too crowded, so it's harder to mix in real time. But that's why I like to use the iPad for that. But in any case, so you connect via Bluetooth. One question that came up is, can you monitor? Can you plug a set of headphones into the iPad and monitor what's happening? First answer to that is no, you cannot. That's not supported, and that's not really the goal that they had. So you still have to monitor by plugging your headphones into the Zoom F8, and that's fine for me. I don't see that as a problem. I think it's actually an advantage in some ways because if you started sending the audio from the Zoom F8 via Bluetooth to the iPad, you're using a lot of bandwidth. And what that's going to mean is that you probably could run into problems actually using the controls, the sliders or the faders. They're not sliders. I apologize. You couldn't use the linear faders. There would be potentially too much latency. And so they wanted to minimize the amount of traffic that was going over Bluetooth. And I think that was a very wise choice. So no, you cannot monitor from the iPad or the iPhone, but you can mix, you can use those faders to attenuate any individual channel. So you have 8 faders, one for each of the channels, plus you have master faders, so you can pull the entire program audio back if you need to as well. And so far, that part of the app works really well. The part of the app that I haven't tested yet is the metadata, and that's kind of an important one for someone that's shooting an actual feature length or even a short film potentially. If you need to put metadata in to tag all of the tracks or the clips that you've recorded, that's a pretty important feature. And it looks like there may be some limitations on that, but I don't think it's a definite showstopper. I mean, I think that for pros that have a system that they've already got developed in terms of what they like to put in the metadata and how they like to manage all that, they may be a little frustrated because it doesn't work exactly like it does on some of the other recorders and mixers out there. And there's some limitations, both in terms of like moving to the next take. It doesn't work like it does on some of the other recorders out there. So I think there's some frustration. I think the good news is that all of that's software based. At least that's my impression. It's most likely software based, so it's probably something that Zoom can change in a firmware update, and that's the kind of thing that they're pretty good at. Zoom has historically been good. I mean, I think even for this old Zoom H4n, their last firmware update that they released for this, and this is an old product. This is a product that's been out for, I want to say, 4 years. But their last firmware update, I think, was earlier this year. So they're still actively doing things for their products, and I would certainly see them doing that on their flagship Zoom F8. So that's coming up here again in the next. Hopefully, this next week we'll be able to take a look at that in more detail for those that are interested. All right. Something to just a note about mixing when you're mixing while you're recording. I think it's important to understand what that actually does. And on a mixer, the way that things are laid out, let me just see if I can find a picture here that will help illustrate this. If we're looking for if I do a search for mixer, I pull up all sorts of kitchen implements. Let's do an audio mixer. Let's just go to the, I guess, to the Yamaha website and see if we can get a nice one. These are actually live mixers. These aren't something you'd necessarily use uh, in recording scenarios. No, that's not panning out either. Come on, guys. How hard is it to find a picture of a mixer? Okay, here they have their TF series. Let me share this here so you can see what I'm looking at. Okay. I'm looking for photos. It's hard to see. I need something a little closer up. In any case, I apologize. I probably should have planned for this a little better. Can we zoom? Yes. Okay. Now it's really pixely. In any case, this is the way it works. So just so I can describe to you here. So here is the XLR input right here. Up here, this little potentiometer or knob in if we're using less if we're using that term. In any case, officially it's called a potentiometer, but this is a little knob you can twist. This is the gain setting here. So the gain setting is what determines the amplification that the preamplifier is doing to the signal. So it's taking a mic level signal and amplifying it up to a much stronger signal, which we call a line level signal. You may have some other things here in each individual mixer, and they may differ a little bit. But then you have down here a linear fader. Again, this is kind of a a slider, if you will. Again, in the unofficial terminology or the vernacular, but the official terms again for a knob here like that is a potentiometer, and then this is a fader. So this gain setting, again, the gain potentiometer or gain trim, sets how much amplification the preamplifier is doing of the signal that's coming in from the microphone. And then you use this fader to attenuate that. So all this fader is doing is taking the signal that's already amplified and reducing the amplitude. So this is actually the reason it's important to make that distinction is that if you have set the gain so that it's too hot and you're starting to get some distortion because the signal's coming in too hot, there's nothing that this fader is going to do to change that. Because it's already coming through. This is my understanding, and I could be wrong on this. I think this is how it works generally in most mixers. So the gain setting is the thing that you really have to get right. And then when you're mixing, all you're really trying to do with mixing is you're making a final output, usually a stereo track of all these different input tracks. And your final output will be maybe a stereo track. All you're trying to do is level the loudness levels between each of the individual tracks. So you will actually pull back the faders on the people that are talking louder than the others, and you may leave the fader up on those that are not talking quite as loudly, just so you can sort of balance it all out. And that's really what mixing is all about, is that it's not necessarily going to fix the isolated tracks themselves, because they're still going to be controlled very much by the gain. And that's important. So in a recorder, like the Zoom F8, you're going to probably record, if you're doing live mixing, you're doing it while you're recording, you're going to record isolated tracks. So all that's going to do is it's going to capture the isolated individual tracks to their own track using the gain setting that you've set or the gain trim that you've set. And then the final mix will be affected by what you've done with the faders here, that stereo final mix or output mix. So that's really all the faders affect. And that's important to keep in mind. So when I'm tweaking these faders while I'm recording, it's not affecting the individual ISO tracks or isolated tracks that I'm recording for each of the individual channels. It's only affecting that stereo output track. And so that's important to keep in mind here too. And that's why I think, let me go ahead and close that all out. It's important to understand that when you are mixing while you're recording, you're really only affecting that mix track, that stereo mix at the end. in most of the productions, the bigger productions where you're delivering the audio, if you're the audio guy, that that stereo track is often, if it's a good one, if you've done a nice job, they may actually use that in the final post production. But it may also just be used for the dailies, depending on how things pan out. So if it's a really high value production and they don't have a fast turnaround, they'll probably go back to the isolated tracks and use those and mix them themselves in post production. But if it's for a daily, they'll just use the stereo track. Or if it's a production where the turnaround time is a lot faster, they may just use the stereo mix track that you provided. So that's what I think is kind of important to understand about in terms of how all that works when you're working with a recorder like the Zoom F8, and it'll actually record 10 tracks. So it'll record each of the individual microphone inputs, plus it will also record a stereo mix based on the mixing that you did with the different faders for each of the channels to balance it all out. So just a little background in terms of how those are typically used. And that it's important to understand because that may or may not work or may not be relevant for the type of piece you're working on. If you're just like a one-man band, like I typically am when I'm doing my corporate videos, sometimes I'll have an assistant. I'll be operating the camera, so I can't usually mess with the sound at the same time. So I'll actually just set up the recorder, record the isolated tracks, and then take care of things in post-production myself in terms of mixing. So if I find that one of the people are louder than the other, I'll have the gain set right so that neither of them are clipping and distorting. But then I'll do that leveling process in post-production as opposed to actually on the recorder itself. So that's definitely a consideration, and that the luxury of doing a mix while you're recording is usually for bigger productions where you have a dedicated sound person. All right. Well, we've had a few viewers in and out throughout the session here. I hope we've covered things that have been helpful for everybody. And again, next week, when we do our help session, we'll make sure that we get this the Q&A panel worked out. I apologize again, it didn't work today. I think it was probably my fault. I had to move this all over to the other Google Plus page. And actually, let me show you that again here, if you're wondering where to find us. And if you want to be notified of these beforehand, let me show you where we're at here. I'm going to share our screen. You want to go to plus.google.com/plus learn light and sound sessions. This is where you will find our notifications for upcoming help sessions. And you can see our current session is actually showing right here. It's a little weird, I guess, but that's where you want to come to watch the pre-recorded sessions. And if you want to come over here and follow me here, we'll get you notified ahead of time when we're going to do our next help session. So thanks everybody that came for today. I appreciate that. And we will talk to you again next week. Take care.